Pakistan has wanted peace in the region. That will never change. Pakistan is pointing out to a belligerent India in its attitude. That may change. And Pakistan's intention to support the Kashmir's cause comes out of the legal responsibility which Pakistan has, its moral responsibility, and the fact that Kashmiris are our brothers, and what they were promised at the time of partition, and promised by a nascent United Nations and a new Pakistan together in the community of the nations. That promise has to be delivered. So our intention has been the same, will remain the same. But what has happened over the past few years, Pakistan cannot close its eyes on that. And as I mentioned, it worries me, the situation today worries me tremendously. It is going exactly as what I have been thinking it would go into unless prevention is done. Last year, if I pick up what I have been saying, and it was nothing new, I am sure a lot of you also are predicting the same direction. We know when you polarize societies, very rarely does a leadership take it out of that polarization. It generally takes about 20 or 30 years. That cycle is not short. And let me give you an example. When the entire world was worried about the Soviet influence in Afghanistan, all of us together, including the United States and other nations, we constructed a jihadi liberation of Afghanistan. And when the Soviet Union withdrew from there, we thought that we'll switch off the button and jihad is over. Doesn't happen like that. The entire psyche of our people and the psyche of the Muslim Ummah had been stoked by that situation. Jihad meant liberation, and it continued. So whenever you polarize a people in any manner, whether on racial grounds, whether on ethnic grounds, or whether on linguistic grounds, that polarization has its momentum and goes on for at least a generation or two before the damage caused by that becomes evident, and nations then retract from that. Lessons are learnt over generations. Lessons are then forgotten after a few generations also. I am also convinced of that. Because I still remember, to construct my argument, let me tell you, I still remember that in the 70s when I was studying in the United States had lost more than 50,000 lives in Vietnam. And the country felt war is abhorrent, war should not be gotten into, and it was a world where the United States had, we thought, learnt a lesson, and they thought they had learnt a lesson. But then later on, things kept on going in the same direction, because a generation learns a lesson and promptly forgets. But between India and Pakistan, what has happened? Pakistan was liberated 71 years ago, and there were promises made. There were principles of division of British India. And those principles were, of course, legally drafted, clearly understood, but then mischief was played on us. That sowed the seeds of disharmony between the two countries. Mr. Gandhi was killed by an RSS, the mother party of BJP, by an RSS individual, because he was talking about peace and a secular India. Today the same gentleman, the same person, not gentleman, the same person who is a murderer of Gandhi is being elevated out of being a murderer into a hero in some sectors of India. But there is a polarization. I may disagree a little bit with what Mohit mentioned here. He said Kashmir is different and what's happening in India is different. No. Our histories and principles were together. In fact, Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah, when Pakistan was formed, insisted on two individuals, Chaudhry Khaliquzzama Sahab and Nawab Muhammad Ismail Khan of Meerut. He insisted that the responsibility of the well-being of the Indian Muslims also is a part of partition, and that he requested these two individuals to stay in India and ensure the fact that there is peace between communities. Chaudhry Khaliquzzama Sahab migrated to Pakistan, but Nawab Muhammad Ismail Khan stayed in India, although his children had moved to Pakistan. So Kashmir is definitely an unfinished agenda of partition. And those who used to question the two-nation theory of Quaid-e-Azam, today in the Parliament of India, it is being said that Quaid-e-Azam actually predicted that these two nations need to be peacefully separated and then to uphold the principles of human rights between them, giving each other's minorities the rights which Quaid-e-Azam talked about. Now that is the history of Pakistan. It was founded on democratic principles. It was founded by a democratic vote and on the principles defined. So when the Kashmir issue came up, there was a nascent United Nations, a very young United Nations, where the world hoped for peace and hoped for resolution after the experience of the League of Nations and the First World War. The United Nations was a center we hoped that it will deliver peace. Today, that peace is elusive. Those decisions escape us because what is more important are vested interests. Nobody thought in the 50s that there would be vested interests rather than principles ruling on decisions between nations. If there are vested interests, you don't need a United Nations. You can sit together as a group anywhere, decide to provoke war, decide to ensure the fact that some minorities or some majorities in regions which were promised freedom are not given freedom. So what is happening, the direction, and I must not miss out in congratulating our Pakistan Air Force and Pakistan Army for defeating terrorism over the last decades and for ensuring the fact that our borders are secure, whether from the air or from the ground or from the sea. A remarkable display of being small, of limited in resources, but reacting in a manner when you shoot down 2 Indian planes. Remarkable. It fills my chest with pride that we are a strong people defended by a very strong army. So nobody can lift its hand against us. But we have been responsible. Remember the fact that in 1974, there was no nuclear arms race in this region. Remember that in 1974, India blasted a so-called peaceful nuclear device. Have you ever heard that term? A peaceful nuclear device. That's the only country which has ever put a term. This is fake news. Fahad, remember that. When we talk about fake news, this is fake news. Weapons of mass destruction, for example, fake news. When countries deliberately make a fool out of its own people and try to fool the world. Peaceful nuclear detonation which prompted Pakistan to ensure that fact. A smaller country, limited resources, smaller in number of people, wanted to make sure that its defense with a belligerent neighbor who has not had peace in the region also. Its interference in Sri Lanka, its interference in East Pakistan, its strangulation historically of Nepal and its resources. A belligerent India aspiring to be a permanent member of the United Nations, a belligerent India which does not understand the concept of human rights, which is famous for its killing of minorities. Don't forget the riots, I think it was 1983, the riots in Delhi against the Sikhs. More than 3,000 Sikhs were killed in one night on the streets of Delhi. Then in Gujarat, then false flag operations on of the train and Pulwama, the belligerence of Hindutva India, not predicted by us alone. People who read may remember Khushwant Singh's book, The End of India, and the arguments being presented today, and the scenery of India today, and the reality of India today exactly matches what Khushwant Singh wrote in 2003, and he must have spent a couple of years writing that book. So in this century, he predicted it's the end of India, and he said Pakistan will not destroy India. India will destroy itself from inside, and that is what we are seeing. Kashmir is a reflection of the same thing. It started from Kashmir, the isolation of Muslims, the fact that India never came to terms with the establishment of Pakistan, although they forced it upon Quaid-e-Azam. Quaid-e-Azam wanted a united India, but then he realized that the politicians in India will not allow these communities to stay together. So therefore, he demanded Pakistan and dragged Pakistan into history. So what is happening in India? My relatives are India, therefore it pains me to see what is happening in India. There were movies made immediately after division or after establishment of Pakistan, in which the same dialogue which is today on the streets of India was meant as a taunt to every Muslim. अगर तुमको पाकिस्तान या मुसलमान पसंद है तो पाकिस्तान जाओ. If you think Pakistan is a good country, go to Pakistan, don't stay in India. And that is the taunt which is there every day today in the streets of India. How can we stay away from that? It is an unfinished agenda. Rights of Muslims, Pakistan must voice the rights of every minority in the world. Pakistan must voice of every minority, whether they're Christians. And I remember, don't forget, because sometimes what happens, these occasions are celebrated to remind ourselves what is happening. There were in India, Christian priests were killed. Churches were burned. Depends on which minority becomes a threat in which region. It's not a question of numbers. So when the Sikh minority were under threat, they were killed. Muslim minority has been under threat, so there were riots in Ahmedabad, there was riots in Gujarat, there were riots in Meerut, there are riots today also. First, the entire history of genocide has always been that first you disenfranchise a minority in a country based on any grounds, whether it's racial, whether they are Jews, whether it's separate language. You first isolate them that you don't belong here, you're not citizen of this place. Then let the public react, burn their shops, kill them, isolate them, and then it leads to a genocide. We have seen that history happening in Europe. We have seen that happening in Myanmar, where the people in Rohingya, and we are predicting that will happen in India. So this is the time for the international community to react, to understand the fact. It is evident if you started looking at least from 2 years ago what was happening in India. The Indian politicians tried to fool. There is no difference. I don't think there is a difference of religion in a manner which I believe the Hindus are peaceful, the Muslims are peaceful. It is the politicians in India which are driving the Hindutva machine and tank over the Muslims. So I think today it is very important that the world understand what is happening. Pakistan showed the example of responsibility. I mentioned the fact that in 1974 there was a so-called peaceful nuclear blast by India, prompted Pakistan to take measures and steps. Then there was in 1999, there was a few nuclear blasts by India, again forcing Pakistan to show that we can defend ourselves. So the history of what has been happening has been of animosity between countries, of warmongering between countries is happening since a long time. So we cannot separate them away from each other. Pakistan has learned, like I mentioned, Pakistan has learned not to polarize its own people. Pakistan has learned that if you polarize your own people, there is a possibility of terrorism. Pakistan has battled terrorism better than any country in the world. I make that statement by conviction and by history, that trillions of dollars have been spent on fighting terrorism. But Pakistan is the most successful country. We have lost lives. We lost probably 100,000 lives in that. But we finally managed to defeat them. So Pakistan has learned. Pakistan has learned non-polarization. Pakistan has learned to fight terrorism, and it fights it. Pakistan has learned that hosting refugees is an expensive venture, but we showed to the world, the high and mighty from throughout the world have been giving us lessons on human rights, but are not ready to open their borders for desperate immigrants running away from wars created by responsible nations in the world. But Pakistan opened its borders, not a single voice emerged. And I repeat it because I want to make sure that the Pakistani people feel proud of that. And the UN Secretary General, when he came to Pakistan, I repeated that fact, that not only did we host 5.1 million refugees, and 2.7 are still here, not only that we hosted them, not only the fact that they were here, but not a single political voice I remember in the National Assembly or in the press who said that these refugees should be sent back right away or not accepted in Pakistan. Today, I am privy to a communication where 40 refugees are being refused by a country in Europe. And we showed the world, you see, we don't do lip service, we've lived the human rights issue in Pakistan. That's where the country is mature. And then when you talk about a radical India and a responsible Pakistan, I must tell you, it's not the Pakistan government which is responsible. It's the people of Pakistan, the media of Pakistan, the government of Pakistan, the politicians of Pakistan, all have shown responsibility. And the best example is that in February last year and in the days building up to that February, the entire media, the entire people, the government and the armed forces talked about peace. There was a frenzy of peace on this side of the border, but there's a frenzy of war. And look at the Indian media, there is no, compare it and wait and you'll find out there was a frenzy of war in India. So Pakistan is definitely a very responsible Pakistan. Pakistan, not only the government of Pakistan, I want to insist, but all the segments, all the institutions of Pakistan have wanted peace. Now, what is the future? I believe we will keep on struggling. I believe that India may have learnt its lesson. I'm not sure yet. There is a resistance in India. There is a talk about Pakistan. There was even probably a Hindu girl who stood up in a public occasion and said Pakistan Zindabad. So there is an understanding in some minor class of India, but the behemoth of Modi's government is still going to react and continue to react. I fear that generally what happens is when there is resistance, they will tighten their belts. What you saw, the images, actually the images shake the world, and that's why I believe the images from Kashmir coming out of what India has been doing is very important, because Pakistan has made a commitment to itself that it wants peace, it wants to fight the Kashmir cause in every forum, which includes the media and the social media. These images are responsible. And for those of you, I would like to recall that I forget the name of the Syrian boy who drowned in the Mediterranean. That image must have created shock in the entire world. So these images are important. So the images coming from Kashmir, and that is why India has sealed Kashmir. It's still under siege. It's like a prison. But ladies and gentlemen, don't forget the fact that there are reports, there are images that India is constructing prisons for the people who will be disenfranchised in their registration of the Citizenship Amendment Act. That's what they did in Assam. What is that for? Are they going to send those people somewhere, or just isolating them in the ghettos, in concentration camps? Not only, the government has said that they've created those prisons. And what are they asking for? Even in Pakistan, if you go around asking the poor that you bring your property document of your grandfather, how many poor people will have property documents of their grandfather? And if you don't have there are two boxes. If you don't bring the property documents, then if you're a Hindu, you will get a nationality. If you are if you're a Muslim, you won't. So that's a blatant something which the Muslims of India have recognized. Now the reaction, the knee-jerk reaction of the BJP government is what you have been seeing all around. The images, what happened at the Babri Mosque, those images from Delhi you have seen. So I believe things may not be going in the right direction, and that is why I heard a very responsible statement by the Prime Minister yesterday. He said the international community, India is in a crisis. He said the international community must guide India out of that crisis. Very responsible. How more responsible can he be? That they must guide India out of that crisis. I am worried about all those in India who will go through this chaos. There are books written by Rana Ayub, a journalist, on the Gujarat crisis and the inside information. The judiciary helped liberate those criminals, and there are allegations against Amit Shah also, there are against Mr. Modi also, and these are not new allegations. The United States government for almost a decade did not give a visa to Mr. Modi because all the evidence pointed that in the Gujarat riots, his government was responsible, and if the books you read coming out of there, they were given the assurance that you do what you want to for 3 days, kill, rape, burn. You will not be touched for 3 days. But then we'll have to show some writ of the state. These are statements made by responsible people, by Mr. Modi and Mr. Amit Shah, etc., before those riots happened. Went on for 3 days. Every criminal responsible almost everyone has been released. No action has been taken. The judge somehow unexplainably died for a cause. Nobody knows how he died and who was a little sympathetic to the cause. So, ladies and gentlemen, having said all that, I believe there is no more evidence which needs to be said. And during Mr. Trump's visit, what happened in Delhi was the biggest example that India is sick and has a problem. And it must be addressed by international pressure because that may work. But unfortunately, my objection to all those strategists sitting among you is the fact that if I look at the chessboard of this region, there are minorities in India under pressure. There is the Kashmir issue. Pakistan has helped achieve peace in Afghanistan. Pakistan wants peace for its own economic development, for the development of its own people. It insists on peace. And then we have in India, which is it has not participated in a SAARC conference for 10 or 12 years today. So every effort at regional peace has vanished into thin air. All their promises have vanished into thin air. What Nehru said has vanished into thin air. What all the leaders of India have said all along this time has vanished into thin air. No promise they will carry, no legal verdict, no legal situation emanating from the United Nations they would carry. I am awaiting the UN High Commissioner's report on refugees. I hope there is a third report which comes out, which looks at Kashmir after August 5. I'm hoping that the secular people living in India will be able to restrict whatever is happening, and this bandwagon of Modi, Hindutva, RSS will stop someday, soon enough, before a lot of killings happen. These riots and this destruction cause a lot of losses, and those people who tried to emerge have lifted themselves up. You know, there may be only 2% members in the parliament in India who are Muslims. Although, according to Indian statistical figures, there are 13 to 14% at least Muslims in India, but only 2% in the parliament. How can they defend themselves? How can they voice whatever they want to voice? So I believe Pakistan has been very responsible. It will continue on this track. I promise you, ladies and gentlemen, Pakistan wants peace. Pakistan is looking for peace. But Pakistan will never compromise on the Kashmir issue. And Kashmir issue, again, as mentioned by Mohit, Kashmir issue is people. It's not real estate, it's people. We are concerned about the people. Pakistan will stand by them. Pakistan will never abandon them. Pakistan will make all sacrifices which are necessary. And the Prime Minister warned India, and we continue as a state, as my responsibility, to warn India not to do any false flag operation to try and hit Pakistan. Pulwama had nothing to do with Pakistan. Imagine our Prime Minister saying that if you have evidence, let us know. If you have any idea, let us know. We will help investigate if anything happened from the Pakistan side. We are sure it didn't happen, but just to reassure them that we are ready to investigate. And the result is that they attack Pakistan. The first time since 1965 they come into Pakistan territory and attack us. And I'm proud of the armed forces for having withstood that attack and making us proud as a nation. But this nation is a great country rising. Human rights, I gave the example, learned from terrorism, insisting on peace, have learned not to polarize our own people. And as our economy improves, it will create a greater space for a responsible Pakistan, ensuring the fact that we take on along all countries which need to demonstrate a responsible world order based on principles, based on merit, rather than vested interests and financial exploitation. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much.